Hello, I'm Marcus Railton, and welcome to Series 3 of the Scots Care podcast. Scots Care is the only charity dedicated to helping disadvantaged Scots across London, breaking the cycle of poverty through services such as financial support, homelessness, mental health therapy, family support, advocacy, sheltered housing, social events and befriending, amongst others. In the new series, I'll be chatting with guests from all backgrounds, all with one thing in common: Scottish roots. Listen to the Scots Care podcast to hear their story. I'm delighted to say that this week's guest is one of the most respected and recognisable voices in British music journalism, the legendary Billy Sloan. For more than 50 years, Billy's been right at the heart of the music world, interviewing some of the greatest artists ever to step onto a stage. His extraordinary career has taken him face to face with icons like David Bowie, whom he interviewed an incredible 7 times, and Paul McCartney on 4 separate occasions. Over the decades, Billy hasn't just reported on music history, he's lived it. Along the way, artists such as Jim Kerr and Rod Stewart have become close personal friends, a testament to the trust, respect and admiration he commands across the industry. Now, in his autobiography, One Love, One Life, Billy reflects on an astonishing life in music, the backstage stories, the unforgettable interviews and the people behind some of the world's greatest songs. We chatted about Billy's early career. He actually started on a building site before moving into journalism, and the pay cut he took was just amazing to do so. He went from 80 quid a week down to 19 quid a week to be a cub reporter in a local North Glasgow newspaper. Billy's not just a great writer, he's an amazing storyteller. So what was really interesting for me was to be able to ask one question and then just sit back and bask in Billy's amazing experiences. Billy is first and foremost a music fan, and he's very proud to say he's a music fan, and he tells a story about that too. And in it there is one slightly sweary word which I kind of went back and forth as to whether I should take it out of the edit, and then I left it in because it actually is done very well, but it does really add to the story that he tells. If you actually Google Billy Sloan, or search him up, as my kids say, you'll see a great photo of him sitting on the side of a bath with a naked Grace Jones who's in the bath covered in bubbles, and we talk about that story too and how that came about, and it's just mind-blowing. We talked about U2 and Bono and when he first met them in the 80s, and we spoke about the health of music today, and maybe we showed our age a wee bit as we talked about gatefold sleeves and 7-inch singles and reading the lyrics in the inner sleeve of our vinyl LPs. But it did bring back some great childhood memories for me. So here we go, for the final time I must say, the last episode of Series 3 on the Scots Care podcast.
Scots Care, the charity helping to break the cycle of poverty some Scots find in London.
Hi Billy, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. Always happy to talk to people about music and great stuff.
Do you know what I'd like to say first of all is you, I was inspired by you, and I grew up reading you, and every time I would come home from school and I would read you in the Daily Record. My dad bought the Daily Record and I would read your column in it, and I thought this is a cool guy. This is what I want to do with my life. And I thought and so you were kind of one of my first big inspirations, because then my first job I ended up following that path and being a journalist at the BBC, but it was you that kind of pushed me in that direction. So, but when you were writing for the Daily Record, you must have been pretty young.
Yeah, I mean, what age was I? I started writing for the Sunday Mail in 1979. I did the Sunday Pop column, and I did that from 1979 until 1983, and then I joined the Daily Record on the February the 14th, Valentine's Day, 1983, and that was when I became a member of staff. So if I was born in 1955, let's do the quick bit of mental arithmetic. That would mean I was 22. I would be 32. Would that be right?
I mean that must be pretty young to have your own page in a newspaper. You really knew what you.
Is that right? Am I getting that right? 1955, 1965, 1975, 1985 would be 30. No, I would be 20. I would be 20. Count it off. Wait a minute. I need to get this right. I'm going to do it the old way, right?
Go for it.
1955, 1983, 5 to 13 and
27?
8. I was 27. I was 27. There you are. I
Yeah.
used my fingers. I was 27. There you go. What happened was that, I did the Sunday Mail for about 4 years doing the column. And then one day there was a notice up on the notice board in the office saying a features writer was required for the Daily Record. And I wasn't going to apply because I didn't think I'd have any chance of getting the job. But I just sort of decided to apply. And I got an interview, which I was astonished at. And the guy who interviewed me was a great old guy called Bernie Vickers, a guy from Manchester. And he was kind of old school, newspaper guy, very, very well respected, not only in Scotland, but all over the United Kingdom, a real newspaper man. And when I went in to do the interview with him, I didn't have a suit. I had to borrow my mate's suit, and it didn't quite fit me. I couldn't fasten it because I was a bit too tubby, more tubby than he was. So I had to walk in with a suit, casual, opened. And the reason for that was because it looked too ridiculous if I tried to fasten the button. And I just really got on well with this guy right from the start, and we really hit it off. And I thought, when I walked out of the interview, I thought I've done quite well with that. But the thing that worried me about it was that I was the first of 15 people that he was interviewing. And
Wow.
I thought by the time he gets to number 15 in 3 weeks' time, he'll have forgotten all about the guy who came in, 3 weeks previously. But he didn't. And he offered me the job, and it was just for a general features writer writing about anything. But then he decided that he was going to have a dedicated music writer because all the Fleet Street papers in London, they had kind of woken up to the fact that young people buy newspapers. And what are young people interested in? They're interested in football if they're a guy, fashion if they're a girl, and everybody's interested in music. So in Fleet Street at that time, you had, believe it or not, Piers Morgan, who did the Bizarre column for the
Yeah,
Sun, a great guy called Rick Skye, who did the Daily Mirror's
I remember
column.
that.
Then you had Baz Bamingboy, who did the Daily Mail. You had Leslie Ann Jones, who did the Mail on Sunday. You had David Wick, who did the Daily Express. So they were all dedicated kind of music stroke showbiz writers. And he kind of thought we should have one of our own. And he billed me right from the very first day that I started. My backside had hardly touched the seat when he billed me as Scotland's #1 pop writer.
Brilliant.
Now, he'd have been more accurate billing me as Scotland's only pop writer because none of the other papers had a music writer at that time. And it was a real kind of baptism of fire because, instead of just doing one column a week for the Sunday Mail, the Daily Record, of course, has got 6 editions: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So, you weren't in the paper every single day, but instead of working on one story a week, you were maybe working on 4 or 5 stories a week. And it was a real kind of baptism of fire. And the other thing was that, the Record had a sports correspondent, a football correspondent, a TV correspondent, an industrial correspondent, a political correspondent, a women's correspondent, but they'd never had a music correspondent until I came along. And I was kind of viewed with suspicion by some of the older guys on the editorial floor who thought, this guy's writing about guys with long hair and guitars, it's not real journalism. But once I started getting interviews with the likes of David Bowie and Rod Stewart and Paul McCartney and people of that caliber, they kind of quickly changed their tune, grudgingly, I have to say. But that's basically how it started.
But your first job out of school was on a building site, and in your mind, was that always going to be an interim step into journalism or music journalism?
No, I had to work, I had to work and earn some money like everybody does. And I went to my first gig on the 21st of October, 1971, at a place called Green's Playhouse at the top of Renfield Street, opposite the Pavilion Theatre. It's now the Walkabout pub. It's a new building that's been built on the site. And Green's Playhouse was an old sort of tumble down cinema, which showed movies, 7 nights a week. But they would occasionally have gigs. And then in 1973, it became the famous Glasgow Apollo.
Ah,
And on the 21st of October 1971, I spent 90 pence to go and see The Who playing at Green's Playhouse in Glasgow. And it sounds dramatic to say it. I mean, it was a life-changing moment. You know, I mean, I stood there and there up on the stage were John Entwistle and Keith Moon and Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend. Up until that point, I'd only ever seen them in TV, or I'd seen them in the pages of the NME or the Melody Maker or Sounds or Record Mirror. And, you know, I had their pictures up my bedroom wall, but there they were, you know, 30 feet in front of me on this incredible high Green's Playhouse stage. And I was transfixed. I mean, it sounds dramatic to say it, but I was absolutely transfixed. Now, like everybody else, probably yourself included, I'd stood in front of the wardrobe mirror with a tennis racket, pulling shapes, pretending I was Jimmy Page or Eric Clapton. And I would love to have been a kind of bare-chested, swivel-hipped rock god like Robert Plant or Roger Daltrey, but I kind of, A, I didn't have the shape for it, and B, I certainly didn't have the musical talent for it. So I thought, I'm going to get into journalism. This is the way into music. I'll get into journalism. And in those days, you know, jobs advertising, you know, journalists wanted, you know, send a letter to the editor. They were few and far between. So I had to get a job in the meantime. So I worked in an office for a while, and then I worked in a building site, and it was quite heavy manual work, you know, quite dirty work at times, you know, and I loved it. You know, all the guys in the building site, 150 guys in the building site, plumbers and joiners and plasterers and electricians. And you can imagine what the crack was like, you know, on the job. But it was heavy manual work. And I decided that it was time to try and kind of make my own luck, if you like. So what I did was I lived in a place called Springburn, which is in the north of Glasgow, quite a kind of tough working class area, great place. And I wrote a letter to the editor of the local newspaper, which was called the Bishop Briggs and Springburn Times, which was based a mile up the road in Bishop Briggs, which is much more middle class and affluent as it was then. You know, it was a kind of back in front door, garden, car in the driveway, a couple of foreign holidays a year rather. And the local council was Tory controlled back then. So it was kind of middle class as opposed to Springburn, which was working class. So I wrote a letter to the editor and said, I notice you don't have a music column. I will write you one if you put my name on it for free. Thinking that if I ever went for a job in a newspaper, if any advertisement ever came up, I could build a sort of portfolio of published articles. So I could go to the guy and go, look, here's what I've done. And he would have a whole load of stories in the local paper, which would say, by Billy Sloan on it. And just by sheer luck, the lady that was the editor, a lovely lady called Nina Young, who's still a friend today, she was looking for somebody to cover the Springburn area. And she offered me a job after about 45 minutes. I'd never previously set eyes on it. I had no experience. And she said, do you want a job as a reporter? Now, at that time in the building sites, I was earning about 80 quid a week because you had lots of overtime and double time and treble time at the weekends. So while my mates were earning, 30 or 40 quid a week, I was earning about 70 or 80 quid a week. So I was quite well off. And when she offered me the job, she said, my budget's very tight. I can only offer you a wage of £19 a week.
Wow.
Which was less than a quarter what I was making on the building site. And I had maybe 300 or 400 quid saved up in savings. I didn't have a lot of money, and I thought I might never get another chance. So I kind of bit the bullet, and I went from 80 quid a week to £19 a week, and began working for the local paper. So the first week I was there, I was covering council meetings, the local football team on a Saturday, the local church fete, the Girl Guide display. It was all that kind of stuff. It was a real kind of learning curve, but it was great. I absolutely loved it, and that was how I got into journalism.
Scots Care supports Scots in need across London. Your donation, big or small, helps us do more with our services. Head to scotscare.com and click donate.
This might be an impossible question, Billy, but do you remember the first big star that you got to, or that you got sent to cover? And what were you, because I think I know I'm going to warble on here a bit, but I think one of the secrets of your longevity is that when I read your interviews, you speak to people, you never lowball anyone, you speak to people like they're equals. And I think that's why I like reading your stuff. But that comes from years and years of experience. But do you remember when you first got sent to interview a big star?
Yeah, the first time when I worked with the Sunday Mail, when I did the column, and the Sunday Mail was a big platform because they sold nearly 1 million papers every Sunday, and it's reckoned that for every one edition of the Sunday Mail sold, 3.5 people read it. So if your dad buys the paper, his wife reads it, and then you read it, and your little sister reads it, that kind of thing. So 3.5 million people reading the Sunday Mail on a Sunday in a population which was somewhere in the region of 5.5 million in the whole of Scotland at that time. It was quite a big platform to be working in. And I'd never been at the country. I didn't even have a passport, and I got asked if I wanted to go to Hamburg in Germany to interview Rory Gallagher, the legendary Irish guitar player. And I went like Forrest Gump with my little passport, and I went on the plane, and I flew to Germany, and we went to see Rory Gallagher, and I interviewed him the next day. And after the gig, the road crew and some of the band took me to the notorious world famous Reaper band, which was full of kind of strip clubs and brothels and all that kind of stuff. But of course, the significance for me was that that's where the Star Club was, that the Beatles had served their musical apprenticeship. So that was a big deal. So that was the first foreign trip I got. But then very quickly, one of the first big stars I interviewed was let me think, it would probably be Pete Townsend or Roger Daltrey. Now, if you'd have told me in 1971 when I watched them on the stage of Green's Playhouse that, barely 10 years later, I'd be sitting in a hotel room in London, one-on-one, asking them about their new album, I'd have thought you were insane. But, that was just how it worked. And what I always tried to do is I approached it from the point of view of being a music fan. And that was pretty uncool to admit that, because the London guys would never do that. They always thought that when they were sitting interviewing Elton John or David Bowie or Rod Stewart or Pete Townsend or Paul McCartney, that they were bigger stars than the stars they were interviewing. But when I sat and interviewed the stars, they could see that I was a fan. And at the end of it, I would say, can you sign something? And they would say an album or a picture or something. They'd say, who's it for? And I go, it's for me. And they were quite taken aback by that, because the London guys never did that. They were too cool for school. And that's just the way I tried to approach it. I'm a music fan, and I'm still a music fan. So, believe me, it's not a chore to sit in a room with Paul McCartney, only the guy who wrote Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Hey Jude, Eleanor Rigby, The Long and Winding Road, etc., etc. And you're sitting and he's telling you about when he used to sit across the kitchen table playing guitar left hand as John Lennon was playing guitar right hand, and they would be making songs up on the spot. So if you're a music fan, it doesn't get any better than that. I mean, so that was always my approach, and I'm happy to say that 50 years later, I'm still a music fan. And as I say, that's a pretty uncool thing to say, because a lot of people say, "Oh, I used to share an office with a guy, and when we were arguing, he would say, the problem with you is you're nothing but a fucking fan with a typewriter." And he meant that he meant that as the ultimate put down, when for me it was the ultimate compliment. Because I think when you stop being a fan with a typewriter, you should just stop. When you've been there, seen it, done it, got the T-shirt, just go and walk the dog, or have a sleep on the couch, or go and see a movie or something. Don't sort of do it if it's a chore. Because I'm quite fortunate that I can say that in 50 years it's never seemed like a chore. It's always been incredibly enjoyable.
And I think that comes across. And one of the reasons we were having a blether today is because you do have a book out called One Love, One Life. And it's a brilliant book. And Jim Kerr of Simple Minds wrote the forewords. And you could tell it's quite emotional in parts of the forewords. He obviously thinks of you as a close friend.
Yeah, I mean, I said to him, he said he volunteered to do the foreword, and he went, "What do you want me to write?" And I went, "Write whatever you like." And there's a kind of standing joke when Simple Minds go on the road and I go on tour with them. They say you always know where to find Sloan on a Simple Minds tour. He's generally in catering, stuffing his fat face. And I thought it would be all kind of things like that. I said, if you want to put the boot in, feel free, put the boot in. But he went the other way and kind of told me that I was his blood brother and that he loved me and all that. And that was a real kind of magic moment, because it was nice of him to say that. But, I really got to know them because I went to see them in January of 1978 at Satellite City, the disco that was above the Apollo in Glasgow. And they just blew me away. And I kind of went up and knocked on the door and asked Charlie Burchill, the guitar player, opened the door and said, I said, "What's your singer's name, mate?" He went, "Jim Cairn." I kind of wrote it down in my little notebook and I went away and wrote about the band or something. And that was basically how I got to know them.
Billy, here's one of the things. When I was doing research on you, I came across this amazing photo and I wondered if you would explain it to me. And it's you sitting on the edge of a bath with Grace Jones, and she appears to be naked in the bath. Could you talk us through that?
Yeah, well, I mean, when was the last time you went into a bath fully clothed? I don't really do that either, although it might be advisable with the shape I'm in at the moment. But no, what happened was I'd interviewed Grace Jones in the 1980s. I'm guessing it was maybe about 1987. And I interviewed her in a hotel in London, Blake's Hotel in Kensington in London. And she's quite intimidating, as you can imagine. She's the woman who famously gave Russell Harty a right hook because she thought that Russell Harty was ignoring her live on his BBC chat show. So I went and interviewed her in this hotel in London, and she was great. She was really good. I'm a huge fan. But she was very intimidating. She's a supermodel. And the PR guy, who was a friend of mine, said, "I want you to come and interview Grace again." And I said, "Look, my nerves are still shattered from the previous time. I don't know if I can handle it." He went, "Look, she'll be fine. She'll be an absolute pussycat. We're going to Milan in Italy. She's on tour. We're going to go to Milan and you can interview her in Milan." So off we go to Milan. I'd never been there before. It's a beautiful city. And we got there on the Saturday morning to discover that the previous night Grace had been out with her entourage. She never travels alone. She always travels with a whole posse of people. And she'd been out the night before. And they hadn't get back until about 5 o'clock in the morning. And they'd taken the phone off the hook and put the do not disturb signs on the doors and told the hotel manager that under no circumstances were they to be disturbed until, they said it was okay. So me and the PR guy, we had a wander around Milan. We went for lunch. We went shopping. Then we went for dinner. Then we kind of sat in the bar. And we never saw her. That was the Saturday, all day Saturday. We never saw her. We never saw our manager. We never saw any of our entourage. They were still had the do not disturb signs on the doors. We got up on Sunday morning. We had our breakfast. We went and had another wander about Milan. We went for lunch. We did another bit of shopping. And then very reluctantly, we had to throw the towel in because, we had to get a flight back to Heathrow later that night and Sunday night. So it was a complete waste of time. We never saw her, we never got to speak to her, and it was a complete and utter wasted trip. And what then happened was that we were down in reception in the hotel, and we'd actually put our bags into the boot of the taxi to go back to the airport to catch the flight to Heathrow, when the phone on reception went, and the receptionist picked up and went, "Hello, hang on." And he said, "Mr. Chalmers," who was the PR guy, "that's for you." And my mate took the phone and he went, "What? Now? Hang on a minute." So he put his hand over the phone and he said, "That's Gracie's manager. She'll do the interview now if you want." And I went, "But we're going to the airport. Our bags are in the back of the taxi." So I said to the driver, I said, "How long have we got? Realistically, how long have we got?" And he said, "Well, it's a Sunday night. The traffic in the motorway won't be busy." But he said, "We'd really need to be off and running in about 15, 20 minutes, so you're not going to make your plane." So I said, "Right, let's go." So we got to the penthouse suite, which was this big, lavish suite of rooms. And when we walked in, it was just a scene of absolute carnage. There was kind of half-eaten room service trays lying about, scattered about the floor with bits of melon and prawn sandwiches and empty bottles of champagne. And there was all these sort of incredible-looking female models lying, with the skimpiest brand pants, or some of them were even topless, lying in the bed, lying in the carpet, lying in the couches. And there was also these amazing looking guys, they looked as if they just stepped out of the pages of Vogue magazine, and they had six packs and their six packs and rippling muscles and beautiful tans and lovely gleaming teeth and gorgeous slick back hair. And I kind of did a quick cinematic pan of the room to see where Grace was, and I couldn't see her. And I thought, maybe we stumbled into the wrong room, but no, we were in the right place. And then suddenly this big sort of muscle-bound security guy who was standing at the bathroom door beckoned me to come over, and he said, she's having a bath. If you want to interview her, you need to interview her in the bath. And I kept waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't a punchline. He was deadly serious.
Oh.
And I thought, right, let's go. So I walked in, and there was Grace Jones lying completely naked in the bath. And I sat in the toilet pan, the toilet seat. I put my tape machine in the bidet. I pressed play and record, and interviewed her for the next 20 minutes about her new album. And at the end of the interview, I thought, I'm going to have to get a photograph of this because nobody's going to believe this. And I said, do you mind if we could get a picture taken? And I fully expected the bouncer guy to come and grab me by the neck and drag me out the room and throw me out into the corridor, but he didn't. So the picture that you see is me sitting down with my back up against the bath, and she's leaning out covered in soap suds with her arm around me. And that was how. And then when all the other journalists heard that, she'd done this interview with a guy when she was lying naked in the bath, they all wanted to do it, but she only ever did it once, and she did it with me. She actually mentioned it a few months later. She was on the Dame Edna Experience. Dame Edna Everage had a TV chat show on ITV late on a Saturday night, at peak time on a Saturday night, and she mentioned it on the show and said that this guy had turned up to interview, and she was in the bath, and she only ever did it once, and it was me. So that's my. And then a couple of years later, I went to interview her in Birmingham. She was doing a gig in Birmingham, and I took the photograph and I got her to sign it, and she wrote on it, "Splish splash,
Oh,
I was having a bath. Love from Grace Jones." So I've got that picture in my filing cabinet just behind me.
Homeless or at risk of becoming homeless? Scots Care offers personalised support, housing help, mental health services and financial grants. We're here to help you find your way home.
Let me ask you about talent, if I've got you for a few more minutes. In all the years, you must sit in front of people now and think, you are exceptional. And I read about you back in the early 80s interviewing Bono from U2 before he was famous. And when you did that, Billy, did you think at that point, are you able to tell, this guy's going to be world class?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you know why I knew he was going to be world class?
Why?
He told me. And he was so confident, so self-assured, and so what's the word I'm looking for? Vibey, that you'd have been a fool to bet against him. I remember the rep, who was a guy called Tony the Greek. His name was Tony Michaelides, and nobody could spell Michaelides, so it was just easier. We called him Tony the Greek. He was known throughout the music industry as Tony the Greek. And he came into Radio Clyde in the tail end of 1980 and said, I've got this new band from Dublin and Ireland. They're coming to play at Strathclyde University in January. I think it was the 18th of January, 1980. 1981, you'll be able to look it up. And he said they're going to be the next big thing. And of course, all the big star DJs in Radio Clyde all ran for cover. U2, what kind of names are? I never heard of them. Bono, who the hell's Bono? And I'd heard the Boy album, which had just been released. And I said, I'll interview them. So I went to see them at Strathclyde University. They played this incredible gig to promote the Boy album. And Altered Images were the support act. They were just up and coming themselves. And at the end of the gig, Bono and I went into a gents' toilet on the 5th floor of Strathclyde University, because it was the only place that was quiet enough and echoey enough to do a radio interview. And I sat and interviewed him. And he told me, that night, we're going to be the biggest band in the world. We're going to tour every corner of the world. We're going to be the greatest live band you've ever seen. We're going to make great albums. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And he was just so enthusiastic that you would have been an idiot to say, no, you're not. Mm. And I've had a great relationship with him ever since. He gave me a quote from my book, which was very gracious of him. And, U2 said they were going to be world beaters, and that's exactly what they became. And the other one that I saw was, when I went to see Simple Minds in January of 1978, when they played their debut gig at Satellite City, the disco up above the Apollo in Glasgow. And they were one of a 4-band bill. Top of the bill was a reggae group called Steel Pulse. Second in the bill was a punk band called a Glasgow punk band called Rev Volting and the Backstabbers, who went on to become James King and the Lone Wolves a few years later. Bottom of the bill was a band called the New Sonics, who were kind of jangly guitars, floppy fringes, buckskin jackets. And a few months later, they changed their name to Orange Juice and signed to Postcard Records. But sandwiched in between, third on the four-band bill, was Simple Minds. Now, if you're asking me if I could have predicted that they would go on to have number one records all around the world, the answer is no. I had no idea that they would play at Live Aid, that they would be the first Scottish band to be able to play their own open air shows when they did two shows at Ibrox. I think it was in 1987. You can kind of look it up. They were instrumental in getting the Nelson Mandela birthday tribute concerts off the ground when they were the first band to said to Jerry Dammers of the Specials, "We'll do it. We'll do the gig." And as soon as Simple Minds said that they would do it, Dire Straits said, "We'll do it as well." Whitney Houston said, "I'll do it." And it became one of the biggest, most star-studded gigs in music history. I could never have predicted that back then, but of the four bands in the bill that night, Simple Minds, I just thought, this band have got something special. And, I'm going to sort of, chart their progress and see if my instinct is accurate. And that's exactly what happened. They're now arguably the most successful band in Scottish rock history in terms of tickets sold worldwide and album sales worldwide, and the influence that they've had and a whole load of other people, everybody from Depeche Mode to Primal Scream to Texas to the Manic Street Preachers, So I knew that they had something special, but I did not know just how big it would get.
I think testament to your own talent, Billy, and your likability is that these people want to keep in contact with you. And tell me if this is true. We've got a mutual friend, my friend Gregor, who's also your friend. And I'm chatting to him and he says, I was having dinner with Billy the other night, me and a whole load of people. And Billy's phone goes and it's Rod Stewart FaceTiming you. And I said, he's not Rod Stewart FaceTime. He says, Rod Stewart was FaceTiming him. Is Gregor pulling my leg?
No, that's true. He sent me a lovely message because it was my 70th birthday. And he sent me a lovely message and sort of said that the next time he was up in Glasgow, we'd meet up and we'd have a drink and get together and stuff. But, I've got to know a lot of people over the years like that. David Bowie was great with me. I interviewed David Bowie 7 times and I was the Scottish journalist that he knew best. And he was always incredibly polite and very professional and very gracious. And I'm grateful to him for that. I interviewed him 7 times, 6 times face-to-face and once on the phone. And he was great. He was just such a nice man and just the talent was just oozing out of him. You could also say that about McCartney as well. I'd be lucky to interview Paul McCartney once, but I've done it 4 times. And as I said to you earlier, it's never a chore to sit in the room with a guy who not only changed music history, but also changed pop culture. There's Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Neil Diamond, Tom Jones, Bruce Springsteen, Elton John, Alice Cooper, John Lydon, Liam and Noel Gallagher, Dolly Parton, Diana Ross. I could name drop for the next 20 minutes. If you're a music fan, it doesn't get any better than that. You sit in a room with Brian Wilson, much as he's a difficult interview, but he's sitting in a room with the guy who wrote Pet Sounds and Good Vibrations and God Only Knows and all those classic Beach Boys hits. It's magical, absolutely magical. There's no other word I can think of to describe it.
Well, wait, what was it that made Brian Wilson a difficult interview?
He was kind of obviously, that Brian Wilson had trouble with drugs over the years, and that affected his kind of mental capacity, for want of a better term. And he came to Glasgow to play at the Armadillo. I think it was in 2001. And he hadn't been in Scotland for something like 20 years. And I've got to hold my hands up and say that as a music fan, I arranged an interview just so I could get my Beach Boys box set, signed by the great man. And I went to the Armadillo in Glasgow and I was in the dressing room and I was doing it for STV, for Scottish television. And he came in and he's a big guy. He's about maybe 6'2", 6'3", so he's big. And he had this big sort of padded puffer jacket on, which even made him, appear bigger. And he'd a pair of kind of wraparound black shades. but there was no small talk or anything like that. And when we did the interview, it was kind of one word answers. Yep, no, yep, no, yep, no. And to be perfectly honest, the interview was a bit of a dead loss. By the time we edited it together, it looked as if him and I were going on like a house on fire. But the interview was a bit of a dead loss. But just to be able to sit in the same room and touch the hem of the garment of the guy who wrote God Only Knows, I mean, it's an incredible experience. I've interviewed Brian Wilson 3 times, and in each of the times, as I say in the book, he's been there is clearly a sort of 30-minute window in each and every day when he's in interview mode, but unfortunately we haven't managed to synchronise our watches. And I've got him when he's been in kind of yep, no, one word answers mode. But he's a genius, an absolute genius, and it was a fantastic experience to meet him on those 3 occasions and see him play live, because I was a bit too young to have seen the Beach Boys as they were, the classic lineup of the band. But he be in the presence of Brian Wilson was very special.
Final question, Billy. And I mean, your career has spanned a great period of time where music has changed and tastes have changed and talent has changed. And I kind of worry that, young people think the way forward is through X Factor or Britain's Got Talent. But is the future of music in a good place?
No, I don't think it is, and this is where the chat gets controversial, because I really don't think that you're a good bit younger than me, but when I was a teenager, you watched Top of the Pops, and you bought the New Musical Express and the Melody Maker and Sounds and Record Mirror, and you read them cover to cover. And you saved up your money and you bought singles and you bought albums and you went to gigs. And I mean, in those early days, I was seeing people like Slade, Mott the Hoople, Queen, Rory Gallagher, Roxy Music, Genesis with Peter Gabriel, the Jacksons. Who else did I see in those early days? Hawkwind, Chuck Berry. The list is absolutely endless. And it's a different thing for kids these days, because I've got 5 grandchildren, and every kid these days has got a collection of their favourite songs on a tablet or on an iPhone. 5,000 of their favourite songs that they can listen to in their headphones when they walk down the street. And my granddaughters, I think they're 27 and 25 or something. I'll probably get their ages wrong. My apologies, but they don't own a single record. They don't own a CD. They don't really know what a vinyl 7-inch single is. They would never buy an album with a gatefold sleeve. And I think that the experience kids get these days when they get into music is very different to the experience we get.
Yeah.
You're 3 clicks of a computer mouse away from any song you want on Spotify or on YouTube. But I don't think it's as sexy as walking into Listen Records in Cambridge Street in Glasgow in 1973, and a guy draws up in a white van and he carries a big cardboard box out and he plunks it down on the counter, and the guy behind the counter in Listen gets a Stanley knife and he slits open the parcel tape, and he opens the box up and he brings out this white album with a picture of a spaceman in front of it with a red and a blue thunder flash painted down the middle of his face. And that was the first copy that I saw of Aladdin Sane by David Bowie. And I instantly bought a copy of the record. I think it was $1.99 or something like that. And I rushed round to Hope Street in Glasgow to get the number 45 bus up to Springburn. And when I was on the bus, I read the lyrics of the songs. I read who played what. Mick Ronson on guitar, Trevor Bolder on bass, Woody Woodmansey on drums. I read who was the producer. I read who was the engineer. I read where the recording chair. And by the time I get into the house, about 40 minutes later, I was almost spontaneously combusting to get the record on the turntable. My mum and dad hadn't come home from work yet, and my brother and sister hadn't come home from school yet, so I had the house to myself for about an hour, and I played side 1, and then I turned it over and I played side 2, and then I turned it back over and played side 1 again, and played the album probably 3 or 4 times in succession until they came in. and it was just the most exhilarating experience I can ever remember.
Billy, thank you. Thank you for joining us on the Scots Care podcast. It's been an utter delight to speak to you.
Anytime, Marcus, my pleasure.
Taddy bye.
Love what Scots Care does? Help us spread the word. Share this podcast, tell a friend, or give us a shout out on social media. Like and share our posts. The more people that know us, the more Scots we can support.